All right. Well, I think we should get started. Thank you all for joining today for SSAT webinar. Today's webinar is talking about the issues of overcoming research burnout in today's academics. As we all know, the landscape of surgery is changing. There's increased pressure for production, decreased profits in healthcare, increased regulatory burden, and decreasing pay line of all the grants that we apply for. These are really challenging environment, and this is why it's very important to turn to our leaders and successful surgeon scientists to understand how do they navigate these challenges. To answer some of these questions, we have put together an amazing panel today. I am Vikas Tudeja. I'm a liver pancreas surgeon at University of Alabama at Birmingham. My colleague is Saj Khan, co-moderator. He's at Yale, New Haven, Connecticut. And our first speaker is Dr. Mary Hahn. I do want to mention that if any of the attendees have any questions, please write or type in the question and answer box, and we will answer them as we go. We will ask few questions after every talk, but then we'll keep all the remaining questions towards the end. Now, Dr. Hahn has to be somewhere, so we will ask most of the questions which are targeted towards her talk right after her talk. So we have Dr. Mary Hahn. She's the chair of Stanford University, and thank you, Dr. Hahn, for giving us your precious time.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tudeja and Khan, for putting this together. It's a topic I think that is near and dear to all of our hearts. All right, I'm just confirming you're seeing my slides.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I was given the topic to talk about RVUs versus RO1s. I hope that everybody is familiar with those terminologies, that we don't have to define them, but RVU is a measure of clinical work, and RO1s is the gold standard, or that we measure for excellence and research productivity, being able to garner an RO1. So I'm going to just give you the chair's perspective in managing these competing interests. And so my perspective is that they're not really competing interests. They're both critical for the mission of academic success. So, and you need both. You can't have a preeminent surgical department with a really highly productive clinical program, and you can't have a successful academic department with only a very research intensive program. So we need both for many reasons. And I'll kind of go through that in a little bit. But so why was I asked to kind of put this topic together then? So there is a problem, and the problem is that the National Institutes of Health and other external agencies do not fully fund a research program. There's a salary cap in terms of your 50% effort on an NIH grant. There's a salary cap that is increasingly separating from the actual salary that we pay our surgeons. So especially if surgeons go up in rank and become more successful, that gap continues to widen. There's no funding really for preliminary or exploratory studies that are needed. And oftentimes in order to get an extramural grant, you pretty much had to already do the work to convince the study section that you're capable of doing the work and that the experiments will work and that the findings will be significant. Likewise, there's not a lot of equipment is getting more sophisticated and expensive, requires significant maintenance, upgrading, and in order to keep up with the latest technologies, funds need to be available for that. We need people, human capital, human resources for the research infrastructure pre and post award. Those are very highly specialized jobs, super important both to the investigator, but the institution, if we get out of compliance with the way the money was supposed to be expended, or just don't have everything documented appropriately, we could lose money, have to pay money back, or even worse, potentially pay fines. And all of this, and any research project, we put together a timeline of when we think the research should happen by, how efficiently we should be able to get it done. And there's always delays, administrative burdens, things like that, where you are paying for people, but you're not able to do the research. And Sometimes the granting agency will give you a no-cost extension, but a no-cost extension means they're not going to fund any of the costs of the delay. So lots of challenges out there for our research enterprise. So how do we cover all these gaps and sources of funds? We have several different things we can look for. One, we can look for clinical revenue, the excess on clinical revenue, philanthropic gifts and endowments, mission support from the deans, the hospital, the institution. But at our institution, and I suspect at many surgical departments, funds kind of flow one way, and it's usually out of and not back into the Department of Surgery. We can, work with our societies such as SSAT for supplementary funds for our promising young investigators. Sorry, I don't know what the, there's something in there that I'm not sure where that came from. Must turn in case log and final PD sign off after UI 5-year. That's from something else. So sorry about that. So from my perspective, the department needs a mixed portfolio to meet the missions of research, education, and clinical care. And every faculty member does not need to contribute to every mission. And focus on each mission tends to vary over the course of one's career. You could have somebody who's an assistant professor who's very research intensive. They may then move forward more into administrative leadership, clinical leadership roles, programmatic development. So even any individual faculty may be a triple threat throughout their career, but not always all at one time. So we need a diverse mix of faculty who are focusing on these different missions at any one time. So we, in our department and most departments, we have to assign an effort to the mission areas, and faculty are evaluated as such. So the bottom line is we have a multiple bottom line approach, right? So we look at our faculty and we're like, what's your percent effort on research, and where is the revenue and the support coming, and what investments are we making there? What's your percent effort on clinical effort, and what revenue is coming from there? And then usually no money follows teaching and training, but that's one of our core missions of our departments. And so we look at how much time and effort that they're putting toward those. And so when we are evaluating faculty and faculty effectiveness and productivity, we're looking at all three of those aspects and kind of doing it. If somebody's 70% research, obviously we're going to expect more scholarship from that person. That's where we're going to put our investments. If somebody's 80% clinical, we're going to expect that they have a pretty good, busy clinical practice. Okay, so I just thought I would give some examples of how funds flow at Stanford, just to how one department of surgery tries to make the math work with all the problems that we laid out. So clinical revenue at Stanford comes in with a funds flow contract with the hospital. So the hospital, we do not have a practice plan. The hospital bills for the physician practice, and if we have a contracted rate per RVU. And right now we have a nice rate. It's 80%, 80th percentile of the MGMA plus some. It's got some nice upsides. The nice thing about this is it's predictable from year to year. So we know a certain amount of work is going to deliver a similar amount of revenue. It's agnostic to payer mix. So if somebody has a 70% commercial payer mix versus somebody has a 70% Medicaid payer mix, those two individuals will bring in the same amount of revenue for the same amount of RVU work, even though the collections are markedly different. And our contract with our hospital pays more than if we were to collect on our own. So because of our negotiated rate, they transfer more to the department than they collect on our behalf. So now there's another weird thing that we do. Every academic medical center does it first, but our compensation is benchmarked to the AAMC top 30. And so we have scales for each specialty and by rank. So an assistant professor is going to make a certain level and they'll go up every year until they get promoted. Then they'll go up every year and then they'll get a big step up for professor. And then they go up, and then at some point we cap it and it doesn't go up anymore, but each rank has 7 steps. So if you think of this, an assistant professor who's getting this contracted rate for their RVU is much more able to cover their salary than potentially maybe a professor who's at a much higher rate. So there's all these kind of idiosyncrasies in the way that revenue comes in to clinical departments and how we spread it around and make it all work. Our compensation plan has a generous year-end bonus plan, and this is important because every faculty has a clinical P&L, and most faculty receive 25% of their excess profit back in a year-end bonus. But the other 75% is how we make things work. Some of it goes to a team bonus too. And all faculty then, on top of their own individual clinical productivity bonus pool, participate in an academic bonus pool around grants, papers, education, activities. And then we also have a quality incentive negotiated a 10% bump on our RVU rate, if up to 10% if we meet certain quality metrics. So as I said, our market-based pay exceeds collections. And with this competitive rate, we are able to meet our compensation needs and have money for reinvestment. And I talked about that the RVU rate is not by salary, right? It's by specialty. So obviously, congratulations, you got a product and you got a bonus, or you got a promotion. Now you have to work harder in order to earn your salary. So this is what it looks like in our department. So these are our revenue sources. So 68% of our revenue comes in from the clinic. You can see about 10% in the green and purple come from endowments and gifts. It's our annual income. Another 8% comes in sponsored research, and 3% in non-sponsored research. And this revenue sharing is kind of an other kind of slush fund bucket. It's mostly designated and not so much discretionary funds for us. So some of the contracts that we have, things like that. So that's how money comes in. So most of it comes in from clinical revenues. So how do we spend those money? So the clinical revenues come in, and 2/3 are spent on salary and benefits for faculty and staff in the department. And then you can see then we're left over with this 35% profit, of which about half of it goes to our bonus plan, and then the other half is left over for reinvestments. So with that kind of half that's left over for reinvestments, what I do is I use it for cost sharing, startup packages, retentions, anything that I think is going to drive the academic mission and the preeminence of our department. And it relies on a social contract between the faculty who are doing the clinical work and everybody, that we all agree that, yes, we're bringing money in, but we need to take some of this, even though you quote unquote earned it, and use it to the benefit of the whole department in advancing the academic mission. And in part, I can justify it at my place, because I can say, if you were just out there collecting, you wouldn't bring this much money in. This is a negotiated rate between the clinical departments in the hospital, knowing that enough money needs to come over for us to support the academic mission. And so far that works for 95% of people in my department. So I think we're all dependent on the margin from the clinical revenue. Gifts and endowments are helpful, but they need to be deployed strategically to however we can. But there's also donor intent that we have to follow. And we really have to be really carefully balanced, driving clinical productivity and maintaining focus on academic missions. We try and do that in our expectations, our promotion, our bonus plans, and things like that. And I think as every department, faculty wellness, belonging, feeling of a collective good are really paramount to make this all work. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share our example.
Thank you, Dr. Hahn. I just want to tell all the attendees that please, if you have any questions, type it in the question and answer box, and we will help you get those questions answered. Dr. Mary Hahn has to be somewhere, so she will be there for the most of the webinar, but would not be there towards the end. So if you have any burning questions, please go ahead and type them now so that I can ask her on your behalf right now. So I'll start there. Dr. Hahn, so the research productivity, the NIH grants, they do bring up, or the Blue Ridge ranking, which brings a lot of prestige to the institute. And all the deans are actually talking about, yes, we want to increase our Blue Ridge ranking. Or is there a way to leverage that to help that cover maybe the NIH salary cap versus the surgeon compensation? Or to fund new hires, which have a significant research component?
Yeah, so so every department, school has a different deal with their school and university around indirect cost recovery, which is the money that is supposed to come in and help support the other expenses related to research. That money for us it's not a big amount. It kind of mostly gets absorbed at the dean's level for paying for space, overhead, other types of things. So we really we're more reliant. I know other departments and institutions is different. They maybe have a better deal with indirect cost recovery, but I think the whole research enterprise has gotten so expensive with all the oversight and regulatory stuff that I suspect most people are not getting as much as indirect cost recovery coming back to their departments.
Yes, I don't see a question in the chat, but Dr. Han, can I ask you another question? So thanks for an excellent talk. From a chair's perspective, in 2023, there's academic health systems as opposed to the traditional universities where there was one tertiary hospital associated with the university. And in this era of academic health system, there are now multiple hospitals associated with the department. So, what kind of conversations do you have as a chair with some of the leaders in these non-tertiary hospitals to support the academic mission to put surgeons in your department? Or I'm sure this is a conversation a lot of chairs may have, but how do you support the research mission at the non-tertiary hospitals to bring prestige? And obviously, the most important thing is to bring surgical research to the forefront, because that's how patient care is improved.
Yeah, so I think for the faculty, we try and engage them in a home in our divisions here, in the department, kind of in that culture that they're supported, nurtured, mentored. We try and find opportunities for trainees to rotate at some of these sites, because I think that's a big satisfier. It makes them feel like they're affiliated with an academic medical center and not just out there in private practice. So those are some of the things we do. There is some research support at one of our other hospitals, but it's not uniform throughout the system. And then I think the last thing, actually, we're negotiating this into our funds flow contract, that we have a new mechanism of some discretionary funds coming to the chairs, the Chairs Innovation Fund, and it's supposed to grow per year based on the system growth. So not just our hospital growth, which is constrained, and that's why people are growing in the system. So that as the system grows, there will be a mechanism by which this Chairs Innovation Fund grows. So we will have some discretionary funds coming back to the department.
Saj, before we move on, I have one more question. So the thing I have difficulty in wrapping around, Dr. Han, is it's so expensive in California, right? The postdoc salaries are very high. I mean, they need money to survive. I mean, we are having a 10% increase all across the board, and I'm having difficulty managing or balancing my lab's budget or our divisional research budget. So how does that affect, or is that cost built in what you ask from the NIH, or is it built into the indirect? I know it doesn't maybe apply to the webinar we're talking about, but that question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think every place is facing this. I mean, I think, we're above the NIH cap for postdoc salaries too, in terms of what's mandated by the university to pay the postdocs. And as you said, I mean, they need it, every bit, penny of it. So, I think it's just one of those things where we look at every source of revenue to help support our investigators, and I think they're just very judicious in how big their lab can really be. I mean, we're space constrained too, so people can't have a 30-person lab as well. So I think space also kind of helps us constrain that cost.
Thank you, Dr. Han.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Han. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Hardiman. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A, and Vikas and I will get that addressed too. So our next speaker is Dr. Karen Hardiman. So Dr. Hardiman is an associate professor of surgery at the University of Alabama. She's also the co-director of surgery undergraduate research experience and the assistant program director for resident research. And Dr. Hardiman is going to spend our next talk here talking about the perspective of a federally funded surgeon scientist. Dr. Hardiman.
Hello, Saj. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate being included, and I will do my best to give you my perspective, if I can figure out how to advance my own slides. So just by way of disclosure, I have some funding. I'm currently an R01 funded researcher from the NCI. I previously have had both a KO8 and an ASA Foundation grant. And just in terms of burnout, I think like many surgeons, this is something that I have struggled with. And I'm going to just share some of the things I feel like I've learned over the last 12 plus years. So I was tasked with a couple things. One was to talk about strategies that burgeoning surgeon scientists can leverage to succeed and establish extramural funding. And then hopefully to transmit some pearls and pitfalls to quote unquote balance research, clinical, and personal demands, and to avoid burnout. So here we go. So first, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, because that'll help you understand my perspective. So I grew up in rural North Alabama, and had got out and about going to college. I went to New England, and at first didn't even understand what people were saying, but eventually I got it. And then I came back to Alabama for my MD PhD, where I learned how much I loved research. I always knew that I wanted to be a physician, but quickly decided that I loved research. And so I did both. I then went out to Oregon and did my residency and my colorectal fellowship there. My first job was at the University of Michigan, where I got my K a few years in, and became a basic and translational researcher studying mechanisms of therapeutic resistance and metastasis in colorectal cancer. In addition, I'm mother of 2 boys and a wife, and I love gardening. So here are some pictures to prove it. The first is of my family in Canada visiting a friend last summer. And then the other 2 are just pictures of my yard with my little chickens and my garden. So it is, as I will discuss, it's important to keep outside interests. So burnout. This affects up to 40% of surgeons who report symptoms of burnout. And in addition, about 30% of surgeons report symptoms of depression. So I wasn't able to find direct numbers about surgeon scientists, but if you look at physician scientists, 30 to 40% of them also report burnout. So who is at risk? Burnout is highest among those who spend the greatest amount of time working, meaning the most hours, and the greatest amount of time spent on both patient care and administrative tasks. It's the greatest among people who feel like they lack autonomy in their work, and among people who are of female gender. So I think this is related to how we define success, which for a lot of people who do research, it's funding, right? And so how do we obtain funding? Certainly initially and probably forever, it's this really, really hard sustained push where you have to delay everything else in your life in order to get enough together to get funded. And, in addition to that hard sustained push, we're constantly being pulled in multiple directions. And as surgeons and surgeon scientists, we have multiple obligations. And so then, maybe you got your funding finally, and then you're thinking like, okay, how do I maintain this? And I have to say, after I got my K, and then after I got my R01, there was this relief and excitement. But then you realize, oh gosh, now I have to do the work, and I have to push and apply for more and do more. And so how do you maintain funding? You keep pushing, right? So you need to apply for more grants. You need to submit papers. And also, by the way, you have to do everything else: clinical work, administrative work, balance everything outside of work. So I think, where does all this constant pushing and delayed gratification get you? Honestly, I think this is really where we get burned out. People decide they no longer want to do research. They don't want to be pulled in all these different directions. They can develop unhealthy coping strategies, become emotionally exhausted. give up, and certainly worst case scenario, there's a high risk of suicide and of adverse patient outcomes. So we really want to try to avoid that. And so what we're going to talk about today is trying to define some strategies to prevent burnout. So to me, I think you want to hone back to what is your driving force and really getting back to what you're passionate about, and making sure that's equilibrates with what you're trying to do. Because if they don't measure up, then it's not going to work. And then trying to really have your team work with you and foster those people. And then try to focus on waves of pushing instead of forever. And then last, I'll talk about trying to maintain a realistic time allocation with some cohesion between the different areas you're working on. So for the first part, I'll talk about defining your driving force and staying in touch with your love of research, keeping your big picture in mind. So you need to ask yourself, why do you do research? So for lots of different people, it's different reasons. For some people, like myself, I love discovery. I love changing or thinking that I may be able to change the trajectory for patients. For some people, it's for the glory of accomplishment. For some people, it's a means to an end. You know, it's like a checkbox. They're going to prove this, that they can do it, and then they don't plan to do it forever. And that's okay. That is not failure. I think you have to figure out what it looks like for you, because success looks like different things for different people. So if your research goal is, you know, if this is part of your driving force, you want to think about what exactly that is and define it for yourself. And so you want to think about what research you're passionate about, what's the purpose of it. Usually this is driven by a clinical problem, and you really want to revisit whether this your research fits into that purpose and driving force again and again, because things change. So in terms of that driving force, you want to try to keep all those research projects as sort of mini stories about your big passion, and try to stay on the mountain. Try to have each of these little things be a path, but not so disparate that you're really falling off in a totally different direction. You want to remember your big picture and look for things to intersect, and try to take time to read and write so that you can really maintain your direction. So the next thing that I think is really helpful is to look at your team. So you want to create relationships and foster development of your people. So your team includes a lot of people. I mean, we think about in research world, we think about our mentors, our collaborators, technicians in our lab, trainees. But for a surgeon scientist, you know, it's also like your friends and family, your administrative support, your support at home, and your clinical team. And all these people will make your life work or not work. And so you want to think about your team and who you specifically want to recruit. You want to create a team that works together, and you want to be supportive of that team and know what your people want, and you want to try to foster their development. So I try to recruit people for very specific roles, but be open, because sometimes you'll find a gem that you don't necessarily know what you want them to do. But you certainly don't want to say no to those people. So you want to think about how your people will interact and develop people for the long term. You want to have pretty strong expectations and goals for your team. You want to foster curiosity and accountability. You always want to listen to your people. You want to develop personal relationships with these people. You want to be a mentor and a sponsor. You want to have collaborations, and you want to have outings. And so you really want to develop and foster this synergy between you and your team. So the next thing I'll talk about is the pushing. So again, I think that it's better if you have some waves of pushing, because forever pushing as hard as you can is just not sustainable. I will also say that I'm not of the opinion that a day-to-day balance is a realistic goal, meaning between, oh dear, something happened. Okay. I'm going to have to reopen that. I apologize. It just totally crashed. So
Karen, take your time.
yeah, I
Just
apologize.
want to
I'm not sure what
mention
happened.
to attendees that please, if you have any questions, go ahead and type it in the question and answer. I have not seen any questions. I just want to make sure. I hope you're typing and we can get to them either as the speakers are giving their presentation or towards the end.
So let me just get to the right slide. Give me
Okay,
just one
that's a
second.
picture of chicken,
Again,
by
I'm
the
so
way.
sorry. I don't know why that happened.
Time, Dr. Herman. No big deal.
All right.
Here we go. Okay, so like I said, I recommend waves of pushing because it just is not sustainable if you just push as hard as you can forever at everything. I think reasonable reasons to push are grant deadlines, manuscripts, things like that. And also you can't expect every push or every wave to be a tsunami. You know, you want to have these nice smooth waves that you can ride, like my kids here, and you want to take breaks. So I think that it's hard to remember this when you're going so hard all the time, but I think you actually should try to take small breaks every day. For myself, it's exercise. I take a break from other things and exercise or go out in my garden, but you really want to cultivate a hobby, something outside yourself, and you really want to nurture yourself. I also think it's really important to plan vacations with friends and family, and maintain connections over time. So again, balance, I think, is not something you can expect for every day, or even week, but I think of it as a month or quarter kind of thing. So I'll push really hard for a couple weeks, and then I might even take a day off here or there, or go do something with my family, you know, even during the week, so that you get that sense of balance over time. So the last thing I'll talk a little bit about is just realistic time expectation. And I really think that this is dependent on developing this cohesion and the concept of a double dip. So when I think about things I am going to commit to doing, I try to think about whether they're going to synergize together with the things I want to do, going back to my big driving purpose. And so I have a research focus, I have some administrative roles, and I have clinical purpose. And to me, like, I want to drive forward my study of therapeutic resistance. And I want the other thing that's really important to me is to train people to be surgeon scientists. And so if it doesn't meet those two things, I'm much more likely to say no. And I'm trying to get better at ending commitments or roles when I agree to take on new ones. And so I think if you focus on these things, it'll help. So just in conclusion, burnout is very common among surgeons and physician scientists. And I think this is probably because we become so used to constant pushing and delayed gratification. Advice to prevent this: really want to recognize the signs. You want to focus on your goals and your driving force. You want to cultivate your team. It's a two-way street. They will cultivate you. I try to just do waves of pushing instead of forever. Remember to take breaks and look for cohesion and synergy in your life. And I would say, if your current job is not working, make a change. And that's not necessarily change to a different job. I just mean change your little world so that it works better for you. All right. Thanks very much. And these are just to acknowledge some of my mentors and people in my lab and funding. And I really want to thank, again, you guys for allowing me to share my thoughts on this. I appreciate it. And these are some pictures of my lab.
Karen, that was an excellent talk. Dr. Hardeman and I were residents together in Oregon. So honestly, when I looked at when you put your earlier slides and you showed your farm, it reminded me of the Devanese, who was our
I do remember that
backyard. So they had a very nice farm in their backyard.
Yeah, I was going to say, like them, I live in town, but you might not know it.
Well, Karen, that was outstanding. So, maybe I could start with some questions. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A section of the Zoom feature. So in your career as a faculty, Karen, what would you say was your most important ask to succeed as a surgeon scientist? Was it when you first started as a faculty member, fresh out of fellowship, joining to become a faculty member? Was it an ask at the level of being a mid-career surgeon? Because when I look at some of the audience here, I see different levels of training that are on the audience here. So I don't know if there's one specific thing that you asked for that you found to be beneficial to get you to the point to being an R01 funded surgeon scientist.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I would say I really didn't ask for very much when I started because I didn't know anything. And that probably hurt over time. I do think that I learned, thankfully. And when I made a move in my job, I did ask for what I thought I needed when I moved to UAB, and all of the answers were yeses. And I was very surprised because I was afraid to ask for what I thought I needed, and they were just incredibly generous. And one of the things that was so helpful was time. I asked for pretty specific allocations, and they said yes. And that allowed me really to have some time to think and focus, so that those ridiculous pushes that we all have didn't just burn me out. Because I think that you're not as good at pushing and being productive if you just don't have time.
Excellent, Karen.
Karen, I really enjoyed the talk. I have few questions. Okay, I'll ask one and then we'll go towards the end and ask, what was the role of your mentors and your colleagues, right? I mean, it's very important to have colleagues who understand what a surgeon scientist, especially a basic and translation surgeon scientist, goes through. Uh, Call coverage during grant time, all those things. So, what did you look for, and what's your advice for the people who will look for a position like that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I can tell you I wouldn't necessarily, I can tell you some of the things I did that I wouldn't recommend, but I mean, honestly, like, I think that some of the most ideal situations are where your mentor's research matches up enough with your own that you're kind of able to extend what they're doing. And then you've got so much already available for you in terms of preliminary data, and you're not starting a whole different area of research in their lab, which is what I did. So I'm not sure I would recommend that. But and then in terms of your clinical group and your partners, I think having support within your group is just crucial. And both when I was in Michigan and at UAB, I definitely have just amazing partners, both clinical and research partners. And so I think that's really great. And then also, I would say, I definitely had several people who mentored me over time who were not like my specific mentor named person, who probably helped me more than anyone. And so certainly, I think just feeling like you can ask for help is really important. And that's one thing I would say. UAB is so collaborative. I've never reached out and had someone say no. It's just really amazing.
Thank you, Karen. And please, whoever is attending, if you have any questions, write in the question and answer box, and we will get those questions answered for you. Next, we have Dr. Tim Pollack. Dr. Pollack is Chair of Surgery at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. He will be speaking on targeting at-risk faculty for research burnout.
Okay, so because I was also going to talk a little bit about burnout and my thoughts about burnout around research from like a chair perspective. So, I think that, for researchers to be successful, obviously, then it's a long haul. It's a long journey. So you need to avoid burnout because you're playing the long game and not the short game. So I totally agree with what Dr. Hardiman had said. I think a big part of this is mindset. And then some of it's environment. But I think a lot of it is a mindset. And the most important thing, I think, is that you need to find out what you're passionate about, right? You need to figure out, like, what do you think about when you're in the shower, when you're in the car, when you're on a run? And that just really wakes you up in the morning. Because if you're doing what you love, right, it's the threshold for burnout is going to be significantly higher. So I think that's super important. So I always tell people that, it is very important to figure out, where do you want to go? Because as a chair, I cannot help you get there if I don't know where you want to go. And this isn't about me, and it shouldn't be about, anyone but you. It's about what you want. What are your goals? So I think, trying to figure out what your goals are and to continually reassess those, because many times your goals are going to change, right? Every 3 to 5 years as we go through life, as we achieve different things. And figure out, what's your journey? What are you trying to achieve? So, I always say, know thyself. Spend a lot of time at the beginning figuring out what you want to prioritize. I was just talking to someone in my office today. surgeon scientist, right? But do you want to be known as the master surgeon? So when they, looking for someone to give a lecture on, rectal cancer, they're going to call you. Or do you want it to be that you're the person they call when they're giving a seminar on healthcare delivery systems, or the molecular pathogenesis of lung cancer, right? So you have to figure out what you want your identity to be, what you want your focus to be, because we're talking about research burnout, but there's also clinical burnout, and the two kind of go hand in hand. And so, as I mentioned, you really got to figure out what you're passionate about, and you got to figure out like whether you're on the right road. Because I think a lot of times burnout happens when people sometimes are doing what they think I want them to do, not necessarily what they want to be doing. And they don't feel like they have permission, especially maybe junior faculty, to say, you know what, I really don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that anymore. I've changed my mind. I want to change lanes. And so, I think that, you should feel empowered that it's okay to change your mind, right? If you came in and you were going to be a clinical faculty member, but now you want more time to do research and you have a good plan, you have good mentors, you should feel empowered to change your mind and get into a different lane. And similarly, if your focus has been on research, but you're feeling very burnt out about it, I'm not suggesting you give up right away, but you shouldn't also flog yourself or self-flagellate yourself for years thinking I'm a failure, I'm a failure, I'm a failure. It's okay to change your mind and just get into another lane and be successful in that lane. And I think that can really help people avoid burnout. I think it's really important to be resilient, and we kind of throw this word around a lot, and I kind of like the different categories on this slide here. And Dr. Hardiman mentioned this. I think one part of resilience is just achieving, right? So I think people get burned out when they want to summit Mount Everest. They want that RO1 in 2 years or 3 years, or they even want the K award in 1 year. You have to set reasonable goals with your mentors, your sponsors, your chairs, your colleagues, and then try to have some quick wins, because quick wins will build resiliency. Because as we heard, and as we all know, applying for grants it's worse than even baseball. I'm a baseball fan, right? Even the best baseball player misses 2/3 of the time. And even if you miss 2/3 of the time, you're still one of the best baseball players ever. So with funding, if you miss 90% of the time or 95% of the time, you can still be very successful, but you have to have some resilience in order to tolerate all of those, pink slips and comments and things like that. So how can you set yourself up to get some quick wins, build some confidence and some resilience early on in the game? I also think just having a positive mindset is important. And one of my heroes is actually Ernest Shackleton, who was the expedition leader to cross the Antarctica. And you're sure you're familiar with this story, but his ship, the Endurance, got locked in the polar ice, or the Antarctic ice, and he's trapped there for over a year. But this whole idea of optimism, I think this is a skill that can be practiced. And I think part of avoiding a burnout is practicing gratitude and practicing optimism, and trying to be very purposeful of like the wins in life, right? There's always something to celebrate. And I think some people, do that better than others. And I'm not suggesting being like a Pollyanna and just saying everything's great. Yet at the same time, I think practicing purposeful gratitude each and every day can really give you a mindset that can help at least attenuate your risk of burnout. And then the other things that I think are important to avoid burnout is, having meaning and engagement and vitality. And I'm sure most of you have heard of this book by Daniel Pink, Drive. And I think a big part of avoiding burnout in research or just in academics are these things, right? Because if you feel like you're having purpose, it is much less likely you are going to get discouraged or feel burned out, because you know that you're contributing, you know that you're doing something meaningful, whether it's for the patient, for your research, for this novel idea that you're studying, this idea of mastery. Like, we all like to do what we're good at. So sometimes if you're not so good at something, like I said, don't maybe just keep going down that pathway. Find what you're good at, enjoy it, master it, because then it will synergize. And then this whole idea of autonomy too. We're all smart people, right? We all want to control our destiny. So I think, when you have purpose, mastery, and autonomy, again, I think it helps avoid burnout. So that's kind of the mindset. But I also think avoiding burnout, there's environmental factors, right? There's environmental factors, because you may know what you want to do. You may know thyself very well, and you may know your path well, but you may be in an environment that has very constrained resources, right? So you know what you want to do, you just can't do it because it just ain't there, right? And, in order to do what you want to do, in whether it's clinically or with regards to research, you need a critical mass. You need a critical mass of collaborators. You need a critical mass of mentors. You need a critical mass of infrastructure, and you need a critical mass of money. And again, you heard this from Dr. Hardiman, that in order to do what she's doing, and she's so outrageously successful, she's at a place that was able to provide her these things: mentorship, infrastructure, money, time. And if provided those things, it helps avoid burnout. Because if you find yourself at a place that lacks this critical mass, that's when you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. So I think, in academic settings, you want to look for places that have an infrastructure, collaborators, mentors, that you can step into and be part of a larger ecosystem, academic and research ecosystem, and not be a lone wolf crying in the wilderness. And I think Vic has said this. I think he hit it exactly on the head. Having peer support is absolutely critical also. Because even as surgeons, when you have a bad complication, I don't know. I mean, I don't go home and talk to my wife about it because, she means well, but it's hard to relate. But talking to another HPB surgeon who can say, yes, you know what, 2 months ago, I had a PJ leak too, and you can commiserate. And I think with academics, that's super important also. So when you get your grant reviews back, that you have a team of not only mentors, but peer collaborators that you can work with, discuss, share stories, share your experience. And I think that really bolsters against burnout also. I think the other thing that is key is alignment, So if you do not have alignment with your chair or with your institution, I think the odds of burnout are going to be significantly higher. Because if my goal is for you to be the busiest work RVU generating person in the department, and your goal is to have 2 R01s and be in the lab, there's no alignment there, right? There's no alignment. So I think it's really important in order to avoid burnout is to make sure that you have alignment with your direct report, whether that be with your division chief, your chair, or even at the institutional level. And we heard that a little bit with Dr. Hahn, is that there's alignment that Blue Ridge is super important to the College of Medicine. Well, then we have to discuss some type of funds flow that's going to help support that at the department level. But if that's not important at the college level, then there's no alignment, and it's going to be hard to get those resources from the college into the department, into the division, and down to you. So I think that's something that you also really want to be looking for. And then I think you have to be in a supportive environment. I think burnout always comes from fear of failure. I'm on the clock. I got to get this done. And if I don't get it done by a certain time, and or if my first grant or K award is triage, Pollock's pulling the carpet out from under my feet, right? That creates an environment where you're kind of like, paranoid, and that's going to lead to burnout again. So you have to be in an environment where it's okay to fail. We have some understanding that, you're not going to probably, hit the ball out of the park on the first swing. It's going to take time. It's okay to fail, right? But that is something you need to identify in your mentors, in your division chief, in your chair. And again, it's this whole idea of trust. It's this idea of commitment. If you're at this institution, you're working with people, I always say to people, you're going to be successful over my dead body, because I'm not going to bring you here and then not have you be successful. So there's this idea of commitment and trust. Now, it has to be a bridge to somewhere, can't be a bridge to nowhere, right? So you have to deliver too. And but it is a commitment. It's a bilateral agreement. Some other things that I think to think about around burnout is just to avoid being pulled in too many directions. And I think one should feel empowered, especially when you're a junior faculty member, to say no. You want to focus, right? You want to focus, not be pulled in a million directions. Focus on what you're passionate about. Build your portfolio, your clinical portfolio, your research portfolio as your junior, and not have people pulling you in 50 million directions. And then you're so diluted, you're so wasted at the end of the day because you had two IRB committee meetings. You know, your mouse colony is dying, and you get a person in the ICU with a PJ leak, right? You're all over the place. You have to focus, and you have to have like iterative success in different areas, and realize you're playing the long game, not the short game. And then finally, that all kind of dovetails into this notion of like self-care. And it's really important to find time to obviously take care of yourself. You need to find, whatever your decompression chamber is, right? To take a break, to recharge your battery. And I think this means many different things to many people, right? I do not like yoga. I do not feel decompressed when someone's trying to like make me do yoga, right? I like going to sporting events. The point being is you have to figure out like, what is your out? Is it painting? Is it reading? Is it whatever, going to yoga? But you have to find time to recharge your battery. And, I like this notion of juggling, right? So sometime your eye is going to be on the research ball. It's going to be the clinical ball. Don't forget the self-care ball. Sometimes, you got to keep your eye on the self-care ball, because the whole idea of juggling, right? No ball can hit the floor, right? So at any one time, it's not perfect balance, right? I don't know if I like the idea of balance, because the idea of like we're always balanced. We're juggling, but I don't want any ball to hit the floor, including the self-care ball. So just to wrap up, from my perspective, as a chair, some of the things that I think are important about avoiding burnout is, again, setting realistic goals, incremental success, early wins, prioritizing what you're passionate about, have support, both mentor, sponsorship, peer support, work on yourself around self-care, utilize breaks. And then I think the last thing I'll leave you with is, I think one of the biggest factors with burnout is comparison, right? And when you go to meetings, I don't know about you, but people always come up to me and say, hey, Tim, last year I did 100 Whipples, I put in 3 R01s, I'm NIH funded, and I walk away. I'm like, that's great, man. I feel horrible about myself. You know what I mean? People in academics are constantly comparing themselves to one another. And it's like the Twitter phenomena, right? Everyone's they're tweeting their best self, right? But you're not getting the full story. So, run your own race. That's what I like this concept. I'm running my own race. I'm trying to beat my own PR, my own personal record. I'm not trying to beat, Vikas. I'm not trying to beat Saj. I'm trying to beat Tim, right? So if you run your own race, you have your own priorities, you know what your passion is, it's much more fulfilling over the long journey. So with that, I'll conclude, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity for being here tonight.
Thank you, Tim. This was really amazing. I really like your slides where you really put the idea forward through the pictures. So I have a question. So you talked about commiserating. So when you hire faculty and who have a specific research interest, like when we have cases which are not going well, we know where to find those people who we can talk to. But when you're talking about research faculty, especially in basic and translational research, and maybe later on we can have Karen also chime in. Do you kind of take special emphasis on who's going to mentor them? How do you link them to the community? Or is there somebody who in your department who does it?
Yeah, we have multiple ways that we do that. So one thing I think, like assigning someone a mentor, in my experience, it typically does not work. I think it's better to have sponsors, so like I've been here a while, right? I know nothing about what you do, but I do know the players here at Ohio State, and I can be a connector, right? I can be a connector and help you find mentors. And then, so I think that's important. I think the second thing is that we have like routine, like even today, we had our monthly research meeting where, we all come together, and like Alex Kim, one of our surgical oncologists, presented his basic science work, and there's other people there. So there's like a critical mass on a routine basis. Structurally, we've set up certain things, mock study sections, right? Our research council. And then also as chair, I have regular check-ins with all, the faculty who are putting in Ks to make sure that they're meeting with their mentors. Because as chair, I could reach out to their mentor and say, hey, what's going on? I heard you haven't been meeting with Vic. I said that recently, you need to meet, but it's hard for the junior faculty member to reach out and say, you got to find time for me. But I think you have to be very purposeful about it, kind of at a structural level. And then also, I think your division chief and your chair have to take a personal interest in it also, to kind of keep the ball moving down the field.
This is excellent. Thank you.
Dr. Pollack, I have another question. That was an outstanding talk. And, I really loved your part about having an out or some way to decompress. You publish every single week when you were at Johns Hopkins as a chair. I don't know how you find the time. So it's great to hear someone like you has to have an out to help reduce burnout. The question I had is, how do you advise, like you're the chair, so you have a lot of people in your department and more than just faculty. How do you advise your division chiefs or the people that are direct reports to you to counsel their junior faculty members to prevent burnout? I mean, is that a conversation you have with your immediate reports, like your division chiefs, or do you directly talk to your junior faculty on your own in regards to burnout?
So I'll say a couple of things. Maybe want to be controversial or not. I don't like talking about burnout that much. I went to this lecture once, and there was someone talking about burnout. It's interesting because you burned out, you feeling burned out, then it's like you almost like wish it into existence. So, we want a permissive environment where we can talk, where people have needs and they're feeling burned out. I'm not saying that, but I think, checking in with people in different ways to figure out how they're feeling is important. I think the other thing, we try to do like a lot of social things. I think getting to know people on a personal basis is important, right? So like even tomorrow night, like all the division chiefs and vice chairs, we are going to escape rooms, and we are going to have like a little competition about who can escape these rooms. And then we're going to go out to eat, because I think you need to build social equity in any type of organization, right? And again, that's important to avoid burnout, because if you get to know people, a lot of burnout can occur at work, but there are other stressors in people's life. And if you can have just some insight into who people are, not just as a surgeon or a faculty member, but who they are as a person, I think that can be very helpful. And it also creates avenues of discussion for people to feel safer to say, you know what, I got a lot going on. I got a lot going on. Maybe it's at work, but I got a lot going on at home. Can we talk? So I think those are the things. And then I think this other idea of just constantly telling people, like, I do not care what you're interested in. All I care about is that you're interested in something. I just want you to have impact. I'm agnostic about what you want to have impact into, and giving people like this permission to do what they want to do, explore what they want to do, and have impact in the ways that they want to have impact, and not have like this weight that everything's very prescribed, if you will. I think that's also very helpful.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dr. Pollack.
Thank you.
So, we're going to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Kamal Atani. So Dr. Kamal Atani is a professor of surgery at Boston University. He's the chief of surgery also at the VA Boston Health System. And he's going to talk on our fourth session here about how to leverage the VA for academic success. Dr. Atani?
Thank you, Saj, because this is really amazing so far. What I hope to do is to convince you that the VA is the best place to achieve academic success and to prevent burnout. Let me see here. So my disclosure is that I am a VA employee, and I've spent my entire career at the VA. Why the VA? We have a really very clear national mission to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors. So we all work towards that mission. We also have two other missions, which is to educate the next generation and to advance knowledge through research. We have no hidden agendas. Our generating RVUs and revenues are very secondary at the VA. So you have to think about our three missions as a tricycle, with the clinical care mission driving research and education at the VA. And I noticed that all of you have an endowed chair. Well, guess what? I have 3 endowed chair in perpetuity. And every one of my faculty has 2 to 3 endowed chairs in perpetuity. The clinical care is, our primary mission, and we have national, very transparent expectation. Our work week is 40 hours. Mind you that very few of us work 40 hours, but the compensation cannot exceed the president's salary. So that's the cap on our compensation. So I cannot pay what Dr. Hahn is paying her faculty. However, very recently, the PACT Act that was passed by Congress allows for significant additional bonuses beyond the cap starting in January 2024. And there is currently a bill in Congress to fold those bonuses into the salary. And this way, we might be able to increase the salaries within the VA. The service and section chiefs are responsible for achieving the clinical care mission. And those are timely access to care, providing value care, and providing safe care. So let me see here, my slides are not advancing. So for the VA, if you look at our RVUs, they do approach the MGMA RVU average for each specialty. However, there is something very advantageous that we do within the VA, and that's based on a national guidance through a policy within the VA. In that we can do a labor mapping for our educational program, for our research, and for our administrative time. So if I have somebody who is 50% time allocated to funded research, that person will spend 50% of their time doing research, and the rest, the 50% clinical time, will generate the 50% RVU allocated to their time. And, if they're able to generate the RVUs during that 50% time for their 50% allocation, I can make the case to hire an additional 50% RVU to provide the additional 50% of RVU coverage. We also have some amazing perks within the VA. Most of us come to start work with tremendous amounts of loans. And there are several programs to pay those loans within the VA. This is one of them. It's the Specialty Education Loan Repayment Program. And it gives people, eligible candidates, about $40,000 per year for 4 years, provided you give the VA 5 years worth of work. So we do achieve work-life balance at the VA. We have proper labor mapping. We have adequate FTE coverage. We have amazing employee satisfaction. We have a financial peace of mind. We don't have to deal with insurances and Medicare and Medicaid. And we have an amazing mission, and we're all driven towards that mission. The VA clinician scientists have protected time to do research and at salaries that are well above the NIH cap. So I don't have to worry about the surgeon's salaries. with an R01 a type of compensation. Everybody gets their full salary. This is Dr. Anne McKee. She is one of our neuropathologists. She has been featured by Time magazine as one of the most influential healthcare scientists. And she's a member of the National Academy of Medicine. She's at VA Boston. And she established the Brain Bank and has done a tremendous work on neurotrauma. We have for basic science research, we have state-of-the-art core equipment with expert technicians and staff to run those equipments and maintain them. We have animal facilities that are state-of-the-art for both large and small animals. We have surgical suites, radiologic equipment. At VA Boston, we even have an MRI for research. There's no overhead. You budget it in your grant for animals and for surgeries, but you do not have an additional overhead, the 60% that our affiliates take from an R01. Our collaborators are, with multiple, you can find a collaborator in basically any area. And you have access to collaborator across the VA and affiliates. For example, we have programs at the VA where investigators are working with Boston University scientists, Brigham, Mass General, and MIT. For big data, we have 62 large databases on VA servers with millions of patients and billions of data points. Some of the databases that I've worked with are FastScript, the medications database, vital signs, the microbiology database, all the labs, prosthetics, and my interest in abdominal wall reconstruction and the various measures. I can see everything within the prosthetic database, transfusion, radiology. And what is amazing within the VA is that you can take one patient across several databases and look at a certain point or a certain time frame and link those databases together. For example, I can, if I did surgery, I want to look at surgical site infection at a particular time. I can see what the organism was, what the antibiotics were that were given, whether the patient was septic or not, and all of this by linking the various databases together. Clinical trials. This is, some of the best clinical trials have come out of the VA, and we have the infrastructure and the funding to do it. We have clinical coordinator centers with biostatisticians, programmers, support staff. We can hire clinical coordinators. There are 165 VAs in the country, and we can enroll any of those VAs, and in turn, they can enroll patients into those clinical trials. Our patients are amazing. They keep coming back. We have very low attrition rate in clinical trials. We have great IT infrastructure, and we have a central IRB. So this is the brain bank that Anne McKee established. We reached 1,000 brain within that brain bank, and it's available to all researchers within the VA. It is located at VA Boston, and anybody can access it to do any research on areas of interest within the neurosystem. We have the Million Veteran program, and we have collected blood and specimens on all those patients, and we have done genomics on all those samples. I have a research program right now linking FastScript to the genomic database. And it's amazing what you can get done. This is the REAP program, Research Enhancement Program, and it integrates basic science and clinical research approaches through a multidisciplinary approach. And what's beautiful about this program is that senior investigators that have research programs within REAP are expected to train new investigators that are joining a READ program. We also have the query programs, the research enhancement research initiative, and it translates research discoveries and innovation into better patient care and system improvements. Those are centers with various researchers that will help in translating the research discoveries into clinical applications. And of course, the cooperative study program, which I mentioned for large prospective multi-center controlled trials. And it is not just to compare one surgery to another or drug to another. It helps establish best practices, optimal therapy, the natural history of disease, and also health-related quality of life. We can also team up with the industry, and we have about $10 billion a year in research and development from industry that we can work with. And you have to be aware of some issues there and avoid conflict of interest, the protection of enrolled subjects, and the public trust. Now, you know, this works best when you're a full-time physician. But there are part-time physicians and surgeons within the VA, but there are perils associated with part-time appointments. You have less than assigned time and energy allocated to the VA. You're sometimes busy generating RVU at the affiliates. The academic activity at the affiliate doesn't contribute as strongly to VA programs, and there is a difficulty in building critical mass and a strong academic center of gravity at VA when most of the physicians are part-timers. Now, I want to draw your attention to a very nice paper that was published in JAMA Surgery in 2021, and that's the sentinel contributions of VA surgeons in shaping the face of healthcare. And it really puts into perspective all the amazing research that has been done within the VA by surgeons. And then I want to draw your attention also to those 3 surgeons that had a significant portion of their career within the VA. Julie Freischlag, Mary Hahn, and myself were all featured in the bulletin of the American College of Surgeons for the research that we've done. So thank you for your attention. These are all our affiliates at Boston, and we work very closely with each one of them, and we have research programs and contributions with all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Otani. That was just an outstanding talk, and that was a great perspective on the advantages of being a research surgeon scientist at the VA. I have a question, for you, and then I guess after I ask you the question, then maybe we can open it up for the panel, just so we could be efficient with our time as well too. So for surgeons that are full-time VA faculty, are they required to do all their research on the VA grounds or the VA laboratory, for example, if they want to do an animal experiment? Must that animal experiment be done at the VA, or can it be done at other sites? I think you hinted at a little bit when you talked about some of your faculty might go to MIT or some of the other universities, but can you tell us a little bit more about, if someone's interested in being a surgeon scientist with a full-time VA position, how can their research portfolio be, if it's at the VA only or not?
So, it's a very good question. And it's amazing. We have so much stuff at the VA that most of the time you don't need to go anywhere else to do your experiments. Actually, at VA Boston, we have faculty from other places that come and do the experiments at the VA. But if we lack the equipment, or if we lack certain things, then definitely we can collaborate with somebody at MIT or Boston University or the Brigham in order to perform those experiments. And that's perfectly feasible.
Excellent.
Dr. Tani, I have a question. So,
Yes.
but that varies based on what your VA is, right? I mean, for example, at Birmingham VA does not houses any labs. So if you are a VA surgeon scientist, you need to have a collaboration with the UAB because the research activity is happening at the UAB.
So yes, you're absolutely right, Vikas. I mean, in Boston, we have almost everything at our VA, but not every VA has the same kind of research environment, and not even all of the research support. So it does depend on where you are and what VA you're working in. Some VAs do not even have a research infrastructure. But if you're looking at the big cities, most of them will have a VA that's quite similar to VA Boston.
Thank you. I don't know if Dr. Pollack and Karen are still around. We would love to open the panel for further discussion and questions. Tim, I wanted to ask you, what are the signs and symptoms you are looking for in a faculty when you say, you know what, you have tried it in research, didn't work out, and now I think for the fact not only for the health of the department but also for the well-being of the faculty, maybe it's time to move on.
Yeah, I think a few things. One is again, just talking to them, and they're passionate about it, right? Because you can sense sometimes when you're talking to people, right? Like all they want to talk about is their lab or their research. They're super passionate about it. And then there's some people after a while, like not so much, right? That when you meet them, they used to be talking about their research in the lab all the time, and now they're not. They're talking about their cases. So that's part of it, kind of, sense of if they've kind of, lost their passion for it. The second thing is just like, where are they voting with their feet? It's one thing if someone's, always in their lab or always trying to, work on their research. It's another thing if someone's spending like, 2 days in clinic, 3 days in the OR. I'm not saying I don't want that. I want busy clinicians, but are their current goals aligning with their current activity? Because it's hard to sustain someone if they're not showing up in their own lab, right? And then I think the third thing is, are they trying, in the sense of like, how many grants did you submit last year? I understand that maybe, you didn't get funded, nothing hit, but, what is the cadence of how frequently are you putting things in? And are you, applying society awards and foundations and the NIH and the DOD and whatever, the VA, if you're in the VA. So you get some sense of like how hard they're trying. And that's how I kind make an assessment. Because someone's really trying hard and they're putting a lot of grants and they're not hitting, and they're really in their lab, they're really still passionate about it. Then I think we want to sit down and figure out like, what can I do to help? Like, why isn't it being successful? But if you don't have those things, then it's a different conversation. Like, do we need to like change paths here, right? You haven't put a grant in 2 years, you're in the OR a lot, and you don't seem to be talking about your research much. We need to have a talk.
Karen, so a question for you. So how do you designate, you described a very well-rounded research team that you have. That's one thing I got away from your talk, that you have a very well-rounded team. So how do you designate responsibility to the team members based on their level of training? For example, if it's a student, would you have a student leading, an undergraduate student leading a project? Would you have a resident leading a project? Or do you change your responsibilities based on their level of training?
Yeah, so I think that project selection is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I think it's hard because you want to not only have it be interesting, an interesting project, you want it to be a useful question that you're asking and that you're having them ask. But you also want to gauge it to their level of ability and their interest and their time. Like I run this summer program, and I think it's probably the hardest thing to do, to come up with a project for someone who's going to be in your lab for 8 weeks, who doesn't know anything. It's so hard, but I try to come up with these little projects that are interesting and get them excited about it. And it's really fun to watch. And then, yeah, so I think basically I wouldn't say anyone, because that's not true, but most people can learn to do research given the proper training and the right tools. And so I think it's got to be some amount of like, you want this project done, and some amount of they're excited about it. Because if you tell someone to do something that they just don't care about, it's not really going to happen. So I think there's some amount of just trying to gauge what people are interested in when you start talking about what you have available. And then you always need to have someone around who's going to be able to help them with the project, because especially residents or students who don't have a lot of experience, if they get stuck, it's very frustrating. And if they don't know how to troubleshoot assays and things like that, they are not going to be very happy if they don't have someone who can help them. So I think trying to set it up so that people have a project they're interested in, can move forward on it. And also I try to pick projects where the answer yes or no is going to still be interesting and publishable. You don't want to pick a bunch of dead end projects because that's not fun.
Excellent. Dr. Tani, a question about collaborative research at the VA. So can you tell us a little bit more about how the VA can be used as a mechanism to do collaborative work, say with the VA, your VA in Boston, doing collaborative work with the VA in Portland, Oregon, or doing work in California? Is the VA set up to do large databases, look at large databases, or collaborative work outside of your state and within other VA systems?
Absolutely. Yeah, some of the Sentinel work that I've done was in collaboration with Dr. Hahn in Birmingham. So yes, you can collaborate within the VA, and actually, if you do not have the expertise within your VA, you can look at the expertise in San Francisco, in Portland, wherever, and put your team together, and as a team, put the grant forward to the VA. And actually, this is the best part about it, because you might not have all the expertise within your facility, but you can gather that expertise across the VA. You can even collaborate with investigators outside the VA, from BU, from the Brigham, from MIT, and allow them to be on your VA grant. But you will have to give those investigators a VA appointment. And it's possible.
Got it.
I actually have a question for Tim and Karen. I think one thing which Tim pointed out in his presentation was the early wins, the importance of early wins and slow and steady wins. Any advice from a chair's perspective or a well-funded federal investigator, Karen? Any thoughts on what those early wins look like? Do you recommend society fundings? Tim, kind of trying to protect faculty from OR early on, and if you have given them a lot of money for research, then that's what they have to focus on. Any thoughts on those?
Right, Karen.
Yeah, I think applying for internal grants and society grants is really helpful. Again, if you are working with a mentor who already has some data, already has some ideas of where to go with research and, next research questions, it's really helpful. I think it can be hard to spend your first little bit trying to generate a whole new area of research, whole new bucket of new preliminary data. So if you have stuff available to you already, that's very helpful for an early win.
Yeah, I totally agree with Karen. I think, also, co-locating people, embedding people in other people's labs. I mean, sometimes, people meanwhile, they come out and they want to have their own lab, right? Maybe not the best idea, and unless you have a really robust background. I think one way to more readily assure early wins, like I said, is to embed you in someone else's lab who's been very successful. Because even early wins can be just like getting an experiment to work, getting your model up and going. That is an early win. It doesn't even have to be a grant or award, right? You know, I'm not a basic science researcher, but I know, I mean, sometimes it can take months just to get your model sorted out. So those are the type of early wins, you know, when people get traction, because then they feel like their research is progressing. And I think that's like the very earliest when you can have. And then like, sure, society awards, association awards, things like that are also critically important.
I love the thought about embedding in somebody else's lab. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat here from Dr. In. So how do non-VA people utilize VA resources? For example, can you run a clinical trial in the VA without having a VA appointment? Dr. Tani, I think that question is probably best answered by you.
The answer is no. You have to have a VA appointment in order to engage into VA research.
But how about having a co-investigator in VA?
Yes, you can have a co-investigators at the VA, but if you want to be engaged in that program, you have to have a VA appointment. And it doesn't take much really, because we can give you a walk appointment.
Work without compensation.
Work without compensation, and give you an appointment. You know, you don't even have to do clinical work. It would be just research credentials, and you can be part of a project within the VA. But in order to be a PI on a grant within the VA, you have to have at least a 5/8 FTE appointment. If you're the one who, you know, is going to be the PI on the grant.
Okay, excellent. Well, you know, I think that's those are all the questions in the chat. So just wanted to, on behalf of Vikas and I, you know, we wanted to thank the audience and the future audience for joining for this SSAT Research Committee webinar. And we also, very importantly, want to thank our 4 speakers. Those were 4 superb talks. We really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. I know I learned a lot from the session, and I suspect Vikas did as well too. You know, and you know, join us for future webinars for the SSAT, not just for the research seminar, for the research committee, but there's other great webinars coming from the SSAT as well too. And on that, we'll say have a great night, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. See you
Bye-bye.
later. Bye-bye.